Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Joining me this morning, our analysts, Republican Phil Harriman and Democrat BJ McCollister. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We'll start with the race for president. Republican candidate Christie calling it quits.
And it's clear to me tonight that there isn't a path for me to win the nomination, which is why I'm suspending my campaign tonight for President of the United States.
At a campaign event in New Hampshire Wednesday, Christie thanked his supporters as he bowed out just ahead of the Iowa caucus next week. Christie's departure could boost support for Nikki Haley. But at the same event, he was caught on a hot mic saying she will be smoked in the race. I quote that word, smoked. Phil, do you agree?
I do. I think Christie's campaign was over before it began. There was no path for him to get to the nomination, and putting his support behind Nikki Haley was probably the right diplomatic move to make, but is that going to create a momentum for Nikki Haley to overtake Trump? I don't see that happening.
I think in this case he's actually saying Nikki Haley doesn't stand a chance
necessarily.
Right.
Yeah, and Phil's right. The race was over before it even started, and it's a sad day for moderate Republicans because increasingly it's being shown that there's not necessarily a home for them in the modern day Republican Party as it becomes more and more extreme. So really, the day of the moderate Republican may be waning.
All right, and speaking of campaigns, while we're in New Hampshire, the fight over its first in the nation status continues. The state's attorney general suggesting the DNC broke the law by calling the state's unsanctioned presidential primary meaningless. This is after they refused to put Joe Biden's name on the ballot there. Is this worth the fight on either side, BJ?
Yeah, well, I actually serve on the DNC, and I was part of the group that made the decision to shift the early primary. And part of the reasoning behind it was that we thought that the early primary should better reflect what the American public looks like. And it's not a slight to New Hampshire, but it's just a reflection of the evolving America that we live in.
Phil?
Yeah, I see it differently. This is something that New Hampshire has in their law, that they will be the first in the nation, and for the DNC to usurp that just I think is disingenuous, because we may think we're a democracy, but we're not. We're a representative republic. Each state is a representative to the federal government, and they just denied them access.
Law aside here, just politically speaking, everyone has looked to New Hampshire and Iowa as those initial states. Does it kind of say that when you don't put President Joe Biden's name on the ballot there, that it's not legitimate anymore? Like, do you have concerns about that?
Well, I do. I think there is a tradition in America. New Hampshire is the first primary. The caucus first is in Iowa. Why would you change that? Oh, because we want to have our candidate in the state, in this case South Carolina, right, where he did better the first time around than he did in New Hampshire.
BJ?
Yeah, I think the other perspective is that generally speaking, New Hampshire and Iowa, they just don't necessarily reflect demographically what a modern America looks like. And so when the decision was made to make the shift, it wasn't a slight to New Hampshire or Iowa, but just a reflection of the world we live in today. And I'll say that the inside baseball of this is that New Hampshire went outside of the guidelines of the party, the republic democracy that we live in, to create their own set of rules, and the party said that they weren't willing to play ball.
All right, changing gears now. Senator Angus was in Israel in the last week with a bipartisan group of senators. King met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other leaders in the region. He says he urged Israeli leaders to change their tactics in the war, though he did not call for a ceasefire, adding Israel needs to focus on minimizing civilian casualties.
It's not that you can't confront Hamas. It's the question of how it's done, and that minimizing civilian casualties in the process is very important.
Now, Senator King said he might support pauses once again in fighting to allow for the return of hostages from Gaza, but both he and Senator Susan Collins are not wavering in their support of Israel, Phil.
Yeah, I think he is being very diplomatic here. I like the idea that it was a bipartisan group of senators that met with Netanyahu, but make no mistake about it, Israel has been very clear they are going to extinguish Hamas. And if the tactics have changed to be more targeted and isolated, great. If that helps them get to their success, good for for them.
But BJ, even the concerns that King noted is that civilians are dying in the process.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, right after the attack, Phil and I were on here talking about our initial reactions, and I think we didn't have a clear view of exactly how far Israel would go. And Senator King is absolutely a consensus builder, and I think that that's what he's doing here. But to me, it seems, to know everything we know and to see everything we know about what's happening on the ground, a ceasefire is absolutely necessary at this point.
All right, in Augusta, Democrats are continuing their fight to protect abortion rights in Maine. They're now pushing for a constitutional amendment. Just months ago, their efforts to expand access to abortion was met with protests. Republicans say this bill isn't needed. Let me first acknowledge that we are all men here at this table, of course, but politically speaking, some Republicans are accusing Democrats of using this just in time for 2024. BJ, do you buy that?
No, I don't. I mean, look, the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade said that the states need to decide. And that's exactly what lawmakers are doing in Augusta. And at the end of the day, whether you support or oppose abortion, what lawmakers ultimately are voting on is whether or not they should send a constitutional amendment to the voters of Maine. And if Republicans truly believe they're on the side of voters in Maine, they should be willing to let voters speak rather than stop that from being on the ballot.
Bill?
I agree with BJ, but it is also political. This is probably the wedge issue in this upcoming election. Democrats want abortion front and center to contrast with Republicans who tend to be, not as in favor of abortion. So getting it in the Constitution requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature and a majority of Maine citizens. So, to BJ's point, if this is really the mood of Maine, then it should go to the voters.
Do you think that's likely to happen?
I don't think they're going to get the 2/3 vote in the House.
I would agree. Sadly, I think Republicans are going to block Maine voters from having their voices heard on this issue.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. The Weekend Morning Report is back right after this. Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Joining me once again this morning are analysts, Republican Phil Harriman and Democrat BJ McCollister. Good morning.
Good to see you.
Thanks for being with us. For the first time this week, we heard from Congressman Jared Golden about his reversal on gun laws following the deadly Lewiston shootings. A day after the mass shootings in Lewiston, Golden surprised a lot of people during a press conference, calling on Congress to act to prohibit the weapons like the one used to kill 18 people and injure 13 others in his own city. Don Kerrigan talked with Golden about that, and the congressman, who has used similar rifles in combat, said he has decided those weapons need to be controlled because they're more dangerous, even admitting to having one of his own.
If your objective is to kill a lot of people, there's a reason why people choose this particular rifle, and I've had to come to grips with that personally here in Lewiston. I think what you could do with them, as an example, is you could have something similar to suppressors, where people have to go through an extra level of getting checked out in order to legally possess them and have a stamp or permit for them. That might be one way to deal
for a
with it.
machine gun?
Similar to that, yeah.
And Don Kerrigan also asked Golden how changing his mind on this issue has affected his run for re-election. He didn't seem worried, though. So, Phil, we'll start with you. Should he be worried?
No, I think he's speaking his truth. I complimented Jared for his courage in the midst of this tragedy to admit that he's changing his positions, and I think Maine people respect that. I think the hard part is going to be not only getting the legislation passed in Washington, but also how do you enforce it? There's already, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of these weapons in the possession of law-abiding citizens. How do you implement this law?
BJ?
Yeah, I will say that with Congressman Golden, he speaks very authentically about this issue. He knows the issue, and I think voters will see that. And while I applaud his efforts to try to do something in Washington, D.C., lawmakers in Augusta also can take action to make changes that will move much more quickly than the slow machine of Washington, and I think that they're poised to do so.
Well, I should also add, we all acknowledge now that what Robert Card did never should have happened. There was plenty of warnings that he was not of sound mind, and those weapons should have been taken away from him under existing Maine law.
But I think the question now is whether or not Mainers and people all across the country should be able to own this specific kind of weapon in the first place, right, BJ?
That's exactly right, and that's what Congressman Golden's talking about. I mean, these weapons are designed for one purpose, and they're not necessary. They're not necessary for hunting. They're not necessary for the tradition that we have of gun ownership in Maine, and they're not needed.
But people own them.
Yeah, people own machine guns. You have to go through a higher level of scrutiny, so to speak, and get a special permit, but you can legally own a machine gun. So if it's about banning them altogether, I'm not sure that's going to fly.
All right, now to the latest in the efforts to impeach Maine Secretary of State Shenna Bellows for her decision to disqualify former President Trump from the state's primary ballot. The House voting 80-60 against the Republican-led proposal. Bellows says she remains committed to working with Maine lawmakers and doing her job.
And of course, I was pleased by the bipartisan vote of support to reject the order to remove me for doing my job. But regardless of how people voted today, I will work with them, all of us, to move Maine forward and to do the work we are required to do to support the people of Maine.
Meantime, Trump's legal team is now asking the Maine Superior Court to hold off on a ruling on this until the Supreme Court issues a ruling on the case in Colorado. BJ, what does this week's vote really mean for this issue as a whole?
Yeah, I think it gave legislative Republicans an opportunity to put themselves on record being opposed to the decision from the Secretary of State. But at the end of the day, from the moment that Colorado made the decision, it became clear that whether it was Colorado or Maine or anywhere else in the country, that this is ultimately going to be decided by the courts, likely the Supreme Court, and that he could appear on the ballot, but what happened in Augusta won't impact that.
And Phil, a new UNH poll found 58% of Maine residents believe partisan politics factored into Bellows' decision. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think the vote not to replace her was the correct one. She was following the Administrative Procedures Act. I just wish that Secretary Bellows had, decided that she had a conflict. She was clearly on the record long before this got in front of her, claiming that Trump was an insurrectionist. She should have, in my view, she should have recused herself and had someone else make that decision.
Who would have been that someone else?
Well, I think the Procedures Act allows her to appoint someone else. So it could have been a deputy in her office, or perhaps someone in the Attorney General's office.
And then perhaps someone would have said that was a partisan move as well. I don't know. I'm just
right, but I mean, it's very clear from her own words before this ever came before her that she was biased.
I think the one thing I'd push back on that is that she did clearly say in her decision that she was pushing this to the courts, and the courts are naturally, in a place where they're not taking these positions on presidential elections and presidential candidates. So I think that she was able to add that nuance in her decision, and like I said, it will ultimately be up to the courts.
Meantime, the battle for second among Republicans continues. Another GOP debate this week between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis.
I wish Donald Trump was up here on this stage. He's the one that I'm running against. He's the one that I wish would be here. He needs to be defending his record.
Let's just be honest. He said he was going to build a wall and have Mexico pay for it. He did not deliver that. He said he was going to drain the swamp. He did not deliver that.
While both of them spent some time going after each other, as you heard there, they're going after President Trump, fighting to be that alternative. Republican voters who don't support the former president going back to the White House. If you had to pick, who would you pick to be that alternative, Phil?
I think Nikki Haley is the one who's demonstrating that she has the resources and the campaign infrastructure. She's gaining more and more people taking a second look at her. And I think after Iowa and New Hampshire, whoever is in second or third place is probably going to have to drop out.
BJ, who do you expect that to be?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic because you have someone like Governor DeSantis who has done so much to solidify base activist type voters. But now Nikki Haley has secured the donors who are really pushing hard on her. And so it's really going to be a combat between what she's able to do in terms of leveraging those funds and how DeSantis is able to mobilize grassroots volunteers.
A lot of TV ads rolling in with that money.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
Let's wrap things up with winners, losers. Phil, you're first.
Oh, thank you. My loser is this week is Secretary Lloyd Austin for not reporting in the chain of command that he was not fit for duty. And my winner this week is Coach Bill Belichick. Thank you for 24 years of taking the New England Patriots from an embarrassment to one of the storied franchises in football history.
Yeah, we wish he left a little better on a
Yes,
high note,
yes.
but we won't talk about that, VJ.
Well, Robert Kraft was going to be my loser, but I guess I can't go down that path. No, the winner this week is General Dunn, who is confirmed by the Maine Senate to be the first woman to lead the Maine National Guard. And the loser this week, like I said earlier, has to be moderate Republicans who are searching for a home in the modern Republican Party as it becomes more and more extreme.
All right, BJ McCollister, Phil Harriman, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this week's Political Brew. Don't forget, Meet the Press with Christie Welker coming up at 9. The Morning Report is back right after this.